Hey there, it's Ganchi. Welcome to myHogwarts.com's Craft Guild's Learn to Crochet series. I'm going to be teaching you just the basics in this first video about materials, the kinds of things that you're going to need. If you have stuff lying around your house, maybe your grandma tried to teach you how to crochet once and you still have the materials, use whatever you've got. But if you need to go out to the store, I'm going to give you some recommendations for which things to get to begin. Just some basics and sort of to go over what kind of materials and weights and sizes of things you will find at your local craft store. So let's start with yarn, right? Most of the yarn you're going to find is what's called worsted weight. It's this sort of standard thickness, and you'll find it in different materials. This here is wool. Wool is very good for insulating and it's water resistant, so it's good for the winter. It's good for hats and gloves in the snow, scarves, things like that you don't want to get hypothermia, so wool is really good for that. But it's not great for warmer climates. You'll find cotton. Cotton is great for the summer because it's breathable. It's gonna sort of absorb. It's good for washcloths or dishcloths or things that will be getting wet. Because it dries pretty well, but not quickly, so it's only going to be good for clothing for like the summer because it's pretty breathable. What I do recommend is going to be acrylic, just because it's the cheapest. For one thing, you can get a big skein of it. The skein is what's it's called when it's in a big sort of ball like this. You can get a big skein for probably a couple dollars, and it's a good standard inexpensive yarn to begin with. And it's made out of these like plastic fibers that are extruded and made into a yarn. It's not going to be quite as soft as something like wool might be, though wool can be scratchy too. But often it's softer once you've given it a wash, so just keep that in mind, that once you've washed your finished object, it will probably get a little bit softer. And it's a pretty good all-purpose material. One last point to make about the yarn you choose. If you're buying yarn, I would recommend you purchase a light colored yarn, white, or in my case a light blue here. Anything that's going to be light is going to make it easier to see your stitches as you make them. So it'll be just a little bit easier to learn as you go. You'll also find different things. I bought some llama yarn once. There's bamboo yarn, which is nice and soft. You'll find all kinds of things from the most mundane to the most exotic. This, for example, is actually a microfiber yarn that's just extra soft. I think this is also acrylic. And then you'll also find different sizes of yarn. So this is called worsted weight. You'll find this yarn is actually a sport weight, which is slightly thinner than the worsted. Both of these are your pretty standard sizes for most everyday projects. You'll get finer. This is called a sock yarn. It's even thinner, and this is good for making socks, as the name suggests, because you don't want big clunky stitches when you're making something that's going to be worn in a shoe like that, because it would cause rubbing. Then you get all the way down to something, this is called crochet thread, and it actually is just a cotton thread. It's a little bit thicker than a sewing thread, but this is used for making things like doilies and lace. For example, this doily here was made with crochet thread, and you're going to use different kinds of needles different kinds of hooks depending on the size of the yarn that you're using. Then you get into your specialty yarns, right? Things that are fuzzy like this, or sort of vary in size like this one. This is your Lion Brand homespun. I have a love-hate relationship with this stuff, but it's very easy to find. And all the way to your absolutely giant yarns like this. There's things that are even bigger if you see people who do that arm knitting, but we are not going to be getting into anything that kind of size. But just know that there are all kinds of options all over the spectrum. Basically, the bigger the yarn, the bigger the hook you're going to want to use. The largest hook that I own is a size P. It's actually made out of plastic, because as you get bigger, it just has to be made out of a cheaper material. You can find hooks made out of plastic, wood. Most of them are going to be aluminum, and then the very fine ones are made out of steel. Of course, you know, if you find an ivory crochet hook, like, it'll be expensive, but it might exist. But basically anything that has a hook at the end can be used to crochet. And the sizing is standardized. In the US, the sizing is letters, and then the European sizing is in millimeters. So you'll see, for example, this, all I know that this is a size P. This one, the next largest I have, is a size N, and then it says N, and then it says 9.00 millimeters, which I believe refers to the width of the hand grip here. And so you've got the hook at the end, and this is used for pulling loops. And then you've got here sort of a ergonomic finger grip. That's basically where you hold it, and then the rest is just sort of there so that, you know, for balance and to fit nicely in your hand. This is a size J. This is a size I. And so you see they get smaller as you go up the alphabet. And then this one is a size G. I don't have an H to show you, but what I would recommend while we're getting started is anything from a G to an I. G, H, or I are a good pick for the worsted weight yarn that we're going to be using. I'm going to be using this size G, and then that'll be, you know, a decent, and it'll just depend on the size of the stitch that you make. Will depend on your personal tension, how tight you pull the loops, and the size of hook you're using. We'll talk more about gauge when we talk about patterns later in the series. And then the smallest hook that I own is this size 2. I think by the time it gets to the very small, we've abandoned the letters, and this is just a really, really tiny hook that is used just for this, for thread crochet. So I just want to tell you briefly what crochet is. A lot of times people will get it confused between crochet and knitting. Basically, crochet is based off the French word for knot, and basically what you're doing is you're taking one loop at a time and you're pulling another loop through it, and you just repeat that in different combinations until you get your the fabric that you're making. So this, for example, it's all stripy, but you can see this is a swatch that I've crocheted, and you'll actually make each stitch individually as you go along. To compare, this is what knitting looks like. It's a lot stretchier, and you actually, when you're knitting, have a bunch of live stitches that are all on your needle at the same time, and so you're working a whole row at once. And so that's basically the difference. The fabric you make with knitting tends to be stretchier, it tends to be thinner, so it has different uses than the crochet, which is a bit bulkier width-wise and a bit sturdier. So depending on what you're making, one or the other might be more practical. But crochet is used, like I said, for doilies, granny squares. amigurumi is a crocheted stuffed animals that are a lot of fun. And so we're going to be teaching you just the basics, one stitch at a time, until we've got a good solid footwork for you to be able to branch off, find a pattern, and make whatever you want for yourself. So we